Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hard Things Podcast. This is your host, Blaine Burgess, and it is May 1st. Cue up your Justin Timberlake memes, because it's gonna be May. I'm sorry. That is a pretty lame way to start out this episode. It's also episode 55, and episode 55 is going to be called The Rocky Road to Dublin. And if you're wondering what the fuck that means that you, if you're listening to this in 2025, May of 2025 specifically, you'll know there's a current movie out called Sinners. It's directed by Black Panther director Ryan Coogler, who, oddly enough, is a former football player, I believe, at Sacramento State, and he has directed many movies other than Black Panther, but oftentimes works with Michael B. Jordan, and Michael B. Jordan stars as two people in the movie Sinners. Also, I mean, gosh, the cast and characters are just pretty incredible. I'm going to say go ahead and go see the movie. So I'm going to try not to give away too much. But there are going to be some spoilers. There's just some shit that I have to talk about that is a little bit unexpected in the movie. And ultimately, there's just no way around spoilers, so it's going to happen. You've been warned 2 minutes into this podcast. So why the Rocky Road to Dublin? Well, this weekend, I've been on break from school. Last week, I did a lot of just working out, a lot of reading. I've now read 5 books in the matter of 6 weeks or so. Been really enjoying reading and reading for pleasure and reading things that I've meant to read for a long time. I had a bookshelf full of books and just never read them. And I think myself have just been very stuck with them. And honestly, human beings, we tend to be very stuck unless something happens. You know, the chaotic entropy of life intervenes and causes you to change. Situations force you to make choices and show who you are. And that's a little bit of what Sinners is about. So, lightly, Michael B. Jordan plays a pair of brothers who worked for Al Capone in Chicago, and they were, I guess, sick of the mob life. They stole from basically Al Capone and a business partner, people who were doing a deal. They basically robbed both sides and then figured out a way to blame it on each other. And they came from Chicago back to their home in Mississippi. Now, I spent time in Mississippi about a year ago, the Delta, and it's tough sledding. It's a poor state. There's a lot of poverty and obesity, but it's got a unique spirit to it, and you meet people down there. You see the culture and how they used to live and how they, just value that kind of tough spirit. It kind of helped me understand this movie maybe a little more than someone who hadn't been there, someone who hadn't studied the culture of it so much, the culture of the South. So very, very interesting. So that sets up, the brothers open a kind of a casino nightclub joint in a barn that's owned by a KKK member. So the KKK member sold them the barn basically so that they could round up the KKK and go in there and kill them, basically making a killing floor for the KKK, and they can kind of, pass it off as an accident because all the people are in one building. When the violence goes down, they can say, "Oh no, they were partying and doing casinos and whatever," and they burn the place down. So it's classic kind of Jim Crow era, black versus white issues. But what's really interesting is the director very smartly, like as dangerous as the Ku Klux Klan was, as dangerous as Jim Crow was to former slaves, as much as it kind of held the old status quo in the South, even though blacks were technically free, they weren't free in the minds of other people. And that's where that era got very complicated, because you could come across a person and they could be a kind of sympathetic, Underground Railroad type of white. They could be a KKK member. They could be any manner of things. As a former slave, they could be someone who is, who was traumatized. I mean, every African American in America, I'm sure, carries some weight of this, but using that trauma to kind of alchemize it to heal and then build a stronger black community versus using it to do violence. And life is just all about choices, but it obviously becomes infinitely complicated when you meet a new person to know if you can trust them. And just because all of the trauma and the pain and the suffering of the Civil War, somebody like 30 miles from where I grew up, General Sherman basically burned the South, so like that's a white guy basically destroying the South. So you generally, like, as much as we want to make it easy in our heads and say it's black versus white, it's really everybody versus everybody. It's infinitely complicated. And you also have to win the battle inside yourself, inside your own mind. So basically this chaos, like I said, chaos is a way that it forces us to move, forces us to change. And your choices will, basically propel forward. Like, are we going to have a better world or a darker world as a result? So, like, your choices matter. Everyone's choices matter. But I just thought the tension of that throughout the whole movie, of just not knowing who to trust, is kind of like, it's just an interesting take on it, purely because then Ryan Coogler, the director, adds in elements of the supernatural. So if you know anything about the South, about Mississippi, or that area, or even Memphis, which is kind of close by, the blues is a type of music derived from, African music that came to America through the slave trade. Music that people played kind of to keep their spirit and their soul alive during slavery. Because as a slave, you get treated very harshly, and they would alchemize that negativity into music, and it would ultimately, keep them alive, keep them moving. Because at the end of the day, you got to stay alive to you ever have a chance to change anything. So he brings music into it and kind of says, like, this supernatural element of there's some people who can play music and connect with their ancestors, and and beyond that, they bring other types of music into it, like Irish river dance. And the main villain doesn't turn out to be the KKK. It turns out to be an Irish vampire. So I thought this was really, really smart way of showing, like, as awful as the KKK leader is and was, he's not even the most dangerous thing that lurks out there. And the Irish vampire is kind of like signifies like someone that he doesn't necessarily hate any specific type of people. He actually is something different altogether. He's a vampire that hates life because he's already dead. And all he wants is to kind of take life and appropriate the culture. So one of the other main characters, his name's Preacher Boy. He's the son of a preacher, which is why they call him that. And he turns out to be a blues legend by the end of the movie. But he plays music and conjures spirits of the future and the past through his music. And basically the vampire guy, if he can turn Preacher Boy into a vampire, he can access that power and contact his relatives. And he's obviously been a vampire, so he's immortal, and he hasn't seen his family. And just like he just wanted that, he wanted that power and came there specifically for him. So you can see, to suggest that there's something more evil than the KKK is, I guess, a little bit controversial because the KKK was so evil. But the vampire is kind of signified of like the evil in all of our souls, because we obviously know in general vampires aren't real, but like energy vampires, people who are kind of like Walking Dead, traumatic things have happened to them, and they take the good-natured, good-hearted energy of people trying to do good, and although they probably deserve that energy, they will take, and grind someone down. And that's kind of how I saw that suggestion of the character of the Irish vampire. His name's Remick. So he clearly wasn't going to stop. At a certain point in the movie, he had turned like a lot of the casino nightclub people into vampires. So he'd killed all these people and started a little, vampire clique, little coven, whatever you want to call it. And what was really interesting is at a certain point, everyone who hadn't been turned into a vampire was locked in the barn that was the nightclub. And I love the fact that the vampire actually couldn't come inside unless he was invited, which I thought was an interesting rule. So everything in life has limitations. So limitations of the vampire is it couldn't come in unless you invited it. And that's kind of the power of saying no. So they would engage with these vampires. They open the door. They'd be looking them right in the face. And the only way to tell us if someone had been turned to become a vampire is if they could come in the barn without being invited. So they wouldn't invite them in, and they would just kind of stand there and look at each other. And they'd be like, aren't you going to invite me in? And they would, do all these things, these manipulative things to try to get in. And when they figure it out after a while, they're like, we can't be hurt unless we go outside or unless we invite them in. So eventually all hell breaks loose. One of the people inside the barn has a kid, and the vampire threatens to go find the kid and turn the kid. So she has an issue. And then in her kind of hysteria, she yells something to the effect of like, come on in, or something like that. And the vampire hears it, and immediately all the vampires descend on the barn. So at that point, they had like wood stakes and garlic and like all these things to fight vampires. And there's just like an all-out war against these vampires. And it ends with the main vampire being destroyed, and the sun comes up and all the party goers get burned by the sun. And I've kind of shared only what you need to know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of other parts to this movie, and really the story of the brothers is the most interesting, but doesn't really have anything to do with what I'm talking about. The kind of the moral of the story is like, this is something that I'm thinking about for the books that I'm writing, and it's really interesting that the kind of the moral of this movie is like, all we can do for people is invite them to join us and act a certain way. And much like the vampires trying to get inside the barn, once you understand that a person may be too far gone or won't make a different choice, you've invited them several times to make a different choice and they still won't. Sometimes you just have to let life work on people. That's why the episode is called The Rocky Road to Dublin, because sometimes life can be a bit of a rocky road, and people that we love in our life, we want to save them from the consequences of their actions. We want to help them, and love kind of helps you try to help them at all costs and makes you stronger. But at the end of the day, if a person is not an actual vampire, but just like an energy vampire, if they're hurting to the point where they only hurt themselves and others, you gotta let them walk the rocky road to Dublin. And that hurts, because it hurts them and it hurts you to know that you had to make that choice. And it hurts you to know that you had to let that person go, kind of do their thing. There's always an invitation to come back, and if you can prove that you've let go of your grief and your anger, that you could rejoin life as it may be. But this is a lesson I've learned in my own life lately, just like letting the past go, letting certain people go. It definitely doesn't feel good, but it's the only way to preserve life. And honestly, if it's not like we're not all powerful, we can't save everyone. All you can do is invite them to choose a better path, and then just walk the path yourself. Be an example. And ultimately, at the end of the day, life's going to sort them out. That rocky road's going to cut their feet and beat them up. And you can just only hope that they learn the lessons they need to learn in time to make something of their life, to follow one of their dreams. And if you as a person, sometimes the most loving act is the act of sacrifice, and just like sacrificing what you want, the way you want things to be, so that they might have any life that they can enjoy. You kind of have to co-create that with the universe or God or spirit or whoever you believe in. So probably one of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn, but watching the movie Sinners did make me feel better. It made me feel better that other people also kind of have this perspective, and it's so powerful to the point where a successful director decided to make a movie about it, and honestly make it entertaining and enjoyable. Like, these are feelings that aren't fun. They're feelings that, it pits your deepest wants and desires against each other. You kind of have this war inside of you. And just to know that, once again, like, these are themes that other people are thinking of. And also, something as painful as Jim Crow South and slavery, showing that this fight, against vampirism and kind of the forces of evil in the world, grief and anger, showing that, humans aren't our enemy. It's really that higher spiritual battle that really is the enemy. And for someone that is African American and in a position of power, instead of causing or like stirring up division, basically saying like, hey, these KKK guys are bad, but this is the real fight. Being able to overcome those feelings of grief and anger is really inspiring. So that movie was inspiring to me. Definitely brought me some comfort in just knowing that there are others out there that see it the same way that I do. That ultimately you just don't want to feel alone. So if you're listening to this still, you're not alone. Go see the movie Sinners, one of my favorites so far in 2025. And until next time, this is Blaine. See you later.